Hello everyone and welcome back to Pass the Aux Chord. We're doing things a little bit differently today, doing something we haven't done on here. Decided what we should do today in kind of a wrap-up of From Xero existing is go through Linkin Park's albums, rank them tier list style, because I think it would be interesting to see how I'm feeling things are stacking up now that everything exists. So we're gonna go classic tier list, gonna go S through F without E because I'm conforming to the societal expectation of not using E. Don't ask me why, I really don't know why it's there, but it's just always been the thing. First off, we're actually gonna start off with the Hybrid Theory EP. I'm honestly going totally off the dome here. I think I could honestly recite the track list. The predecessor to the Hybrid Theory album. This is the debut EP while the band was called Hybrid Theory. Honestly, it goes far underappreciated. Carousel being one of the more relaxed tracks on here, really has some heavy meaning behind it, is one of the more interesting, in a unique way, tracks that they really ever put together. Honestly, one of my favorites. And One is a great track, very dynamic track. It goes through a lot of phases. It sounds very cool. This is a little bit lo-fi, a little bit crunchy, but if you like that rough around the edges sound, it'll be perfect for that. So I do really appreciate that aspect about it. You got Part of Me being your little closer, your little wrap up at the end. Has a big instrumental section at the end. There's like this droning little looped beat, and then it busts into an instrumental kind of electronic based outro towards the end. There is like sort of a hidden track. It does totally feel like a predecessor to what would happen on Hybrid Theory. In fact, I want to say it's a predecessor directly to maybe By Myself, sort of a demo, sort of a thing like that. This is a pretty fantastic EP. Like, it's some of their best work despite being so early on. Such a rough little piece, but the rough around the edges aspect of it just warms my little heart. So we're gonna put that in A tier. Honestly, I think it's fantastic. I suppose while we're here, we might as well just throw the Xero demo tape EP type thing on here too. Kinda cool how this one sounds. Again, very lo-fi this time around, much more so even than the Hybrid Theory EP. It sounds like gravel. It was recorded in a bedroom. All of the tracks, you can pretty much directly see where they ended up turning into a different song down the line. I believe Stick and Move kind of is still its own thing. It's so rough around the edges, and it is almost entirely just demo versions of what would come later. Also have a different singer on this. This was before Chester came into the band. Doesn't sound quite as good. Not as impressive of a vocalist. Not that I can hear him all that well anyways. We could probably slide this into a good C or D tier. We'll slide it into the D tier. I mean, realistically, a lot of things came after it that were better. Let's slide into the actual albums here. We got Hybrid Theory, of course. This might be the first CD I own. It's revolutionary. It's one of the best pieces of music within the nu metal subgenre pretty easily. Linkin Park are fairly uncontested in the genre as a whole. You've got things like System of a Down, you have a few other contenders, but for the things that are the direct, all the baseline key elements of nu metal, they're pretty much the best one that ever did it, and Hybrid Theory really shows off the style. It is just the start of things, but it shows off all of the style that you would come to know the band for. Paper Cut is a pretty fantastic opener, really gets the thing amped up, although I have definitely played it to death. And then One Step Closer as well, I would say totally the same things about, although it is one of their heavier tracks just in general across the discography. Other highlights, there's of course With You, another heavier standout. By Myself is probably the song that I come back to on this album at this point because I've played so much of this album to death. Another one that gets in kind of a little heavier bag, gets a little more aggressive with it, sounds excellent doing so, and then that leads us into In the End. Of course, maybe their biggest hit ever. It was a very successful song at the time, and still is today. Of course, a little bit more of a mellow track, so it kind of lends itself to an accessible audience, brings in a lot of the rapping elements with some really iconic lyrics. It's not really one that I come back to anymore, but it is still a great song. Yeah, Cure for the Edge, one of the more interesting instrumental tracks they ever put out, although these things usually ended up as unfinished demo tracks if you find them later on. And then I want to say Pushing Me Away for a long time was a favorite of mine, but truthfully, over time, it's just really fallen off with me. And while I highlight all of these iconic tracks and try to break down just how essential they are, I don't really love how Hybrid Theory is produced when compared to what came after it. I think Meteora just has a crisper punch to it, and this does seem a little bit flattened down, if that makes any sense. I think there's exceptions to that rule. By Myself is probably the biggest exception. There's just a little bit something flat about Hybrid Theory, and it's always hit that way for me. It's part of the reason why I currently be more likely to come back to the EP. I'm someone who just prefers things a little bit more rough around the edges, and Hybrid Theory seems kind of monotone in that way. It might be a weird take, it might sound kind of ridiculous. Eventually, when it all breaks down, that's kind of where I'm at with it. The iconic nature of it makes it tempting, very much so, to put it at the S regardless, but there's just certain tracks on here I don't want to hear again. There's certain elements of the production that I don't really care for. Makes it slide its way down a tier to the A tier. I think that's okay. I think that's a fine place for it. While I would call Hybrid Theory the album that made me like music, because in the end did solidify my Linkin Park appreciation at a very young age, Meteora had the most songs that appealed to me right out the gate. Numb and Somewhere I Belong in particular were some of the first songs I ever liked, and they still have that immediate appeal. There's something so cathartic about the writing and the performances. It just comes across so well, especially to just someone who's going through it a little bit. I am biased in every sense of the word. I am fully willing to admit that. I was saying that the production on Hybrid Theory feels a little flat, a little compressed sometimes to me. Full dynamic range just isn't as punchy as I'd like it to be. Meteora, not an issue at all. We got the highs, we got the lows, everything's punchy, everything's hitting. Even as an instrumental track, I think I prefer Session to Cure for the Edge. I just love the way the drums sound in that track, and then the way it leads into Numb is fantastic. Other highlights on here, I mean, I could list off every track. I'm looking at them right now. Even the intro, even the glass breaking, and the way it leads into Don't Stay is such a fantastic little opening, because you want that glass breaking sound separated so Don't Stay is a little easier to come back to, but it just busts in, letting you know it's not compromising. Don't Stay is one of the really great songs to do that with. Lying From You, Hit the Floor kind of have the same energy, very heavy tracks by their standards. And then Faint ends up being one of my favorite Linkin Park songs. Really love the looping kind of sound that goes on throughout the track. Reminds me of something we'll get to later. Breaking the Habit is one that has resonated with me and I've felt the impact more of as I've gotten older. It's one that I come back to specifically. It's probably the poppiest cut on this record, I want to say. Maybe paired with Somewhere I Belong to an extent, but really such a great song with such great writing. I'm coming back here. I took a little bit of a cut. I don't entirely know what all I said, but Meteora is fantastic. Easy S tier. If you wanted to like S tier, like S plus, something like that, I'm not going to. It'll just be S on there because it's going to be higher than everything here. Spoiler. I think it's the most obvious pick for their best album, but I can see where someone's coming from in choosing Hybrid Theory. Minutes to Midnight, third studio album, one of the most heavily controversial, because you have people who absolutely love this record and you have people who just simply aren't a fan, and I think there's good points on either side. Personally, for me, I end up having a love-hate relationship. There's always a certain song that I really like at any given time, always a certain song I don't really appreciate. Over time, the one that's really stood out to me is Given Up. Of course, you have that super long, extended scream vocal that sounds absolutely great, and another one of their heavier songs really sounds like it could be placed on Meteora, one that you want to replay. It's just great. Leave Out All the Rest, fantastic emotional moment. One of the least heavy songs and some sort of indication maybe that they were going down a path that people didn't like as much. But still, it holds up excellently to me. Incredibly good song as far as I'm concerned. Then we get down and things get a little bit more inconsistent. What I've done is probably the poppiest song that's more rock oriented they did, if that makes any sort of sense. Very catchy hook, but a little bit of rockin' instrumentation on that one that sounds pretty cool. I definitely liked it very early on. One of the songs that got me into the band for sure. As things go along even more, you get in between, in pieces, little things give you away, no roads left. All of these songs really have an emotional punch that a lot of their discography doesn't. Do appreciate them for that. However, they are also some of the least exciting to listen to. And just some lack of an extra edge, that extra little stylistic push. Looking more in here, Valentine's Day is pretty good. No More Sorrow is also one of the only other pretty heavy tracks on here, if not the only one. Bleed It Out, of course, was a hit. Don't think it's aged the best out of everything on here. I think this one gets a solid C tier, put it right in the middle, call it a day. Next we have what has really become their most debated album in recent times, 1,000 Suns. You had people who loved it, you had people who hated it. Now it seems like it's really come full circle and everybody loves it. I don't think my opinion's really ever changed on it. I've always liked this album. I found it underrated originally, and I found it overrated at this kind of cult classic status it's reached. It's really odd to me, and maybe it's just like a contrarian thing that's happened where people have wrapped back around and started appreciating this so much, or maybe people are just seeing the nice little things that are here. Overall, one of their most electronically influenced albums, and it does feel the most like a full cohesive album experience more than it does a collection of songs. You have intros and outros here that kind of do their thing pretty nicely. There's a lot of transition moments, almost more so than there is fully fleshed out songs. So it's hard to come back to pieces of 1,000 Suns, more so than the albums that came before it, which is probably what drove people to dislike it a little bit more. But there's a bit of a concept here, definitely strays far away from the emotional edge that they had going on for the entirety of their first 3 albums, really. Much more big picture, I suppose. Talks about war more, and there was a little bit of that on Minutes of Midnight. Elaborates on those themes, does so in a pretty cool way. Looking at specific track, always loved Wretches and Kings. I think that one is one of the hardest hitting of their more electronically influenced tracks. Great chorus. Love the vocal approach, and the rapping on there actually sounds absolutely fantastic as well. Looking more through here, maybe it hasn't aged the best, but When They Come For Me is one of my favorite solo Mike songs, if not my favorite. I love his rapping on there. The style, the approach, even the instrumental on that song is pretty fun, pretty awesome. Waiting for the End is one of the most emotional moments on the album for sure, and I do love everything it does in that regard, and The Catalyst is just a fantastic sounding song. I think we can slap a cool B tier on this one because it is the most conceptual approach they ever really messed with. It's got some good standouts. I'm not like the biggest fan of it compared to a lot of their work, so I kind of feel like this resurgence in love for it, or people coming around to it at least, is not entirely unjustified. I wouldn't say unjustified, but it's just a weird thing to see. Next up, we have a weird personal favorite, Living Things. Living Things is really cool to me. Probably the 3rd one I listened to, front to back. Feels like it shaped my tastes a little bit. Maybe their most electronic fusion of things type elements going on. There's lots of rock. There's also lots of electronic based things happening here. Poppier songs on here. You have Burn It Down. Burn It Down was a big radio hit. I remember that being a song that I heard everywhere at the time that it came out. Honestly though, if we're gonna point at one that I like as an individual track that was a bit of a hit, I do like Castle of Glass the most. Lots of emotion packed into that song, and a lot really resonates with me about some of these electronic-based, more emotional songs from the band, and this is maybe just the best one. Roads Untraveled and Victimized are songs that I feel like go really underappreciated. Roads Untraveled is beautiful. I love the poetry of it. One of their best written songs, if you're gonna actually ask me. Really a song I love. And then Victimized, I think the heaviest probably on here. Just has a hard-hitting edge and punch to it. Some very heavy vocals on there. I think how this album kind of wraps up in its third quarter is pretty underrated. Skin to Bone and Until It Breaks are some of the most ominous and brooding tracks that just have this weird little edge that's unexpected. I really like Until It Breaks despite it being a least favorite for a lot of people. There's just something kind of strange about it, but I'm not a huge fan of the rapping on that song, but this little chorus thing, that aspect of it is really neat. Tinfoil brings back that like second to last track being an instrumental type thing that happened more in their first two albums. I think it's a good one. I can't go without mentioning Lost in the Echo. Honestly, same tier as Castle of Glass, and now I'm questioning what I said about Castle of Glass because Lost in the Echo might be even better. Also, a great music video on it, and I love the kind of picture metaphor that goes on in there, and just the whole color scheme of anything related to this album. For me, legitimately, Living Things gets an A tier. Yeah, I'm cool with putting it right there. Like, I enjoy every song quite a bit, and it has the ones that I come back to the most. Next up, we have The Hunting Party, another underappreciated album in the discography, if you're gonna ask me. Keys to the Kingdom, Guilty All the Same, War, all some of the heaviest, like almost thrash leaning songs that Linkin Park ever put together. Kind of a crazy list of features. Rakim, Darren Malakian, and Tom Morello, all on the same project. None of them doing something super crazy, but it's just kind of weird to see this collection of names here. Final Masquerade and A Line in the Sand is one of their best closing notes that's in the entire discography. A pushing 7-minute song isn't something you ever saw from them. The way that track progresses really keeps a very consistent energy. Love the way vocals were handled on here. There's not as much rapping from Mike, but what there is, especially on like Keys to the Kingdom, sounds excellent. It's them at their heaviest, and it's them at their best at times. It does feel a little bit more homogenized, leaning towards the wider rock and metal space. Does feel like it's kind of commercial appeal, but not in the pop sort of commercial appeal, more in the metal sort of commercial appeal. I wasn't really listening to the radio like that when this came around, so I can't say for sure, but I feel like it probably was just all over the rock metal radio stations. We're gonna give it a B tier. I don't really feel like putting it any higher than that, just because a lot of it really isn't doing anything specific. But while it's not doing anything super specific, it's also just succeeding at the thing it's doing, if that makes any sense. And you have a couple songs, I would say literally the first and last song are something totally different for them. One More Light, at the time it came out, was pretty infamously bad right out the gate. This is their poppiest album to date, and it's not a pop influence like we saw in Living Things that I was in any way a fan of. I would compare this album the most to the Chainsmokers out of anything they ever did. That's like what immediately comes to mind. Maybe even what like Maroon 5 was doing at the time. Either way, it's some like really dramatic but also very generic and surface level pop music that is slow. It has some emotion behind it. Tracks like Heavy do kind of hold up to this day, but just really all around. I mean, Battle Symphony was kind of a cool moment. Good Goodbye, kinda rock. You have very notable standouts, but you also have like just their worst songs pretty easily. Sharp Edges, rough, Halfway Right, Sorry for Now, Invisible. Talking to Myself at the time I kind of liked, but at this point, coming back to it, it really just feels like there's so many other Linkin Park songs that have this same energy to it, but way more amped up. So I guess I was kind of looking for something to like. There is a big exception though that does feel like such a great track all around, and that is the title track. It is very slow, it's very mellow, it's very emotional, and it lives in that kind of general space, but it being a tribute the way that it is, and it being as well written and performed as it is, the mellow energy of it is perfectly fine. I really appreciate that title track, and that is just kind of the wider general consensus as well. Realizing that I did put an F tier originally and said we were going to do an F tier, but I don't feel like just sending it to the depths of hell, okay? We got a couple standouts. It can go in the D. It's like a 3 out of 10, maybe. It's not a 0. It's not crossing the 5 mark. It's not getting into the yellow or the green, alright? But there's some moments, and unfortunately, it really appeared to be their send-off for quite some time, until just the other day, basically, and that's the reason we're coming back today, to kind of just wrap it all up and just take a look. We got From Xero. From Xero came out recently, a new lead vocalist with Emily Armstrong, formerly of Dead Sarah. Leading up, we had The Emptiness Machine, we had Heavy as the Crown. Emptiness Machine had a little bit of Living Things energy to me, as well as a decent bit of Hybrid Theory. Those things put together made for a pretty excellent song. Some of the best that I had heard from the band since Living Things, really. And then Heavy as the Crown really sounds like Faint off of Meteora, and just all around has a Meteora type energy. While I wasn't necessarily a fan of the writing, because it's kind of doing a very vague thing on these tracks, especially Heavy as the Crown got me super excited for the album, but then the negative aspects of it started to show themselves pretty quickly with our third single, which was Over Each Other. Really one of the most generic and standard pop songs that the band has ever put out. The only other song on the album, though, thankfully I ended up putting on the same level as it, if not worse, honestly, is Stained. I can't stand the vocal melody on this. I had a few people a little bit upset about that on the reaction video, which just not the reaction I expected at all. I don't mess with Stained, unfortunately. Good Things Go is less heavy, definitely doesn't get into the big metal space that a few songs on here do, but has a multi-phase nature to it. It's pretty cool of an outro. I don't really get a lot from it coming back to it, but if we want to put it as an outro, it's not bad. But then you dig in a little more and you get some of the best songs on the album. You get some of the best songs from Linkin Park, maybe in general. Cut the Bridge is super fun. I wouldn't call it one of my favorites, but I would call it a banger of a track. You get down to Two-Face, even Casualty as well, which has Mike Scream vocals, which was super crazy, but Two-Face really calls back to something like One Step Closer, really some of the Meteora songs in general, the heaviest song from them in quite some time. Two-Face is amazing. So we've got quite the mixed bag on this album, and I think the attempt was to re-highlight each era of the band. If I look through, I can find songs that would be absolutely at home on each and every album. It's a little bit harder to place what would go on 1,000 Suns. I mean, maybe Good Things Go. Also, Overflow kind of has that mood to it. With the entirely metal oriented energy of the Hunting Party, it's kind of hard to say what could fit there, but I want to say IGYEIH, or I Gave You Everything I Had, would do the trick with how harsh the vocals are and how fast paced the song is. A lot of it just ends up being obvious, but it really seems like they touched on every era of the band. Unfortunately, I feel like 2 of the songs at the very least touched on One More Light, and didn't really need that. All around, I'm gonna slap this in a B tier as well. I don't think it lives up to some of the band's best work by any means, just because it being a mixed bag is a little bit rough to listen to it start to finish, but at the same time, it's a pretty quick listen. I want to say a good like 33 minutes. It's a quick listen, and if you hit the skip button twice, as far as I'm concerned, it's a really solid listen. So we'll give it a B tier, a really good start to something exciting with Emily Armstrong as the new singer. They're doing a big tour. I'm excited for that. Last but far from least is actually not the most recent album from the band, but one that's timeless, one that you could put anywhere. We've got Cookies, Sweet Hamster, like Jewels from America. This excellent piece of music goes so underappreciated. Songs like Bubbles have so much life, energy, and fun to them. No laundry? Who wants to do the laundry? Are you fucking kidding? I don't want to do the laundry. Of course, we have PB and Jellyfish and 26 letters in the alphabet. Timeless classics. Easiest S tier of the day. But with all that, we've pretty much covered all the bases, so that's gonna just about wrap it up for this one. If you liked what you saw here today, a like on the video would be greatly appreciated, and you can subscribe to the channel and turn notifications on for more music related content coming your way. I will see you in the next video.